Good evening. Tonight on Player Profiler, today we are breaking down AFC East depth chart battles. We have a very in-depth discussion about the New England Patriots to get into, as their depth chart, as we all know, is as muddied as any other NFL depth chart out there. There are a lot of questions about the Bills receiving core and the Bills RB2 spot. And then we have a couple of questions to answer in New York and Miami, the AFC East depth chart battles that you need to know about for fantasy football right now on Player Profiler today. Good evening, everyone. Welcome into Player Profiler today, Saturday edition. I am your host, Matt Babich. Happy 4th of July weekend. My first chance to say that on the Player Profiler News Network. Seth Dewald and I streamed an underdog draft and our 6 bold predictions for the 2024 season over on the main Roto Underworld YouTube channel, Dynasty Roundtable, a weekly podcast on Wednesday nights. Be sure to check it out if you haven't yet. But the reason we are gathered here tonight, is to talk about the AFC East depth chart battles. And yes, I'm a Patriots fan, but we have to start with New England because it's probably the most wide open competition in terms of opportunities that we have right now in the NFL. They have a QB battle. Their entire receiver room is fighting for opportunities. We can essentially scrap everything we've seen in the years past without any talent to speak of in New England. Guys like Kendrick Bourne were getting 20% target shares because they had no one else. So we'll talk about what to expect in this receiving core, but let's start with the quarterback battle. So as of right now, and it's no shock to anybody, that the leader in the clubhouse on paper is Jacoby Brissett for the New England Patriots. And I'd be a fool to sit here and tell you that Drake May is likely or probable to start day one for this New England Patriots team. It's not going to happen. They got Jacoby Brissett for a reason, to be their bridge guy. And they grabbed a competent game manager to teach Drake May the fundamentals of being an average quarterback. See, the thing about average quarterbacks like Jacoby Brissett is you have to be able to take care of the ball. Because if you're Jacoby Brissett and you can't take care of the ball, you have no use in an NFL football game besides subbing out for Phil Rivers on a 4th and 1. And that's what Jacoby Brissett does. In 6 out of 7 qualified seasons, he was outside of the top 32. Sorry, wrong stat. He ranked outside of the top 20 in danger plays in each of his full seasons. So every time Jacoby Brissett is playing a full season, he is outside of the top 20 in terms of danger plays, so upper percentile in terms of taking care of the ball. Now, when you look at his production numbers, his efficiency stats, anything that is not related to turnovers, he stinks. He's average. He did keep the Browns afloat with Deshaun Watson on the bench, but he still only has one career season of 3,000 passing yards. He has no seasons with at least 20 passing touchdowns. His career high is 18. And in 6 of the 7 qualified seasons, what I mistakenly started to mention earlier, he ranked outside of the top 32 in catchable pass rate. So every season that Jacoby Brissett has stepped on the field, he has been one of the worst quarterbacks per Player Profiler in giving his targets catchable balls. Does that sound familiar? Because it sounds a lot like the quarterbacks that they've been working with in years past. So right off the gate, the only benefit to Jacoby Brissett's profile is that he is mobile, he can run, and he takes care of the football. So Brissett does not offer anything exciting to the Patriots, and anyone who suggests otherwise is a fool or kidding themselves. So we know Drake May is more talented. I know I don't need to reference this stat, but he threw for 4,300 passing yards, ran for 2 yards shy of 700 rushing yards, and 45 total touchdowns at the age of 20 years old in his second year in college throwing to Josh Downs and Antoine Green. I love Josh Downs, but if that's your best playmaker on a season where you're putting up nearly 5,000, actually you are putting up 5,000 total yards and nearly 50 touchdowns at a Power 5 school at the age of 20 years old, first year as a true starter, that's incredible. And the fact that Drake May wasn't getting more praise is criminal. The fact that there were questions as to who is better, J.J. McCarthy or Drake May, is criminal. It's obviously Drake May. And he's the starting quarterback of this team at some point in this season. Most likely November. But the thing about rookie quarterbacks, especially those that are taken in the top 5, top 10, is that teams don't keep their new franchise quarterback candidate on the bench all season, all rookie season, unless they're a competitor with who they have now. I was arguing in the chat of a Sonic Truth YouTube stream when some poor soul decided to reference Jordan Love and Patrick Mahomes sitting all their first rookie seasons. Newsflash. The Patriots aren't going to lead the AFC East with Jacoby Brissett like the Chiefs did with Alex Smith in Patrick Mahomes' rookie season. The Patriots are not going to be an Aaron Rodgers-led Packers team. And it's asinine to suggest that those situations are at all similar. So Drake May, this team may be afloat. But if the defense is just as good as it was last year, i.e., anything that is competent or better in terms of quarterback play, is going to keep you in games. If it's like that, and with Judon and Christian Gonzalez back, I assume it's going to be. If it's like that, it's going to be hard to keep May on the bench. Because even if they're winning games and Brissett is putting up 180 passing yards in a game where they scraped by 17-14, there's going to be a game where they give Drake May a shot. It could be week 5. The Patriots could be 2-2 in week 5. They're down 18 points in the fourth quarter. I don't know. Maybe Brissett takes a bump and has to come out of the game for a minute. Maybe they're down. Maybe it's an injury. Drake May steps in. Very efficient 2 drives, big play, touchdown, couple scores. It could be over. If May gets any sort of shot in these games, it could be over quickly because May is that much better. So don't kid yourself. Drake May is playing this season. He will start. And in dynasty leagues, he's an incredible value. In fantasy leagues, if I have a deep enough bench, I'll keep Drake May in Superflex leagues. I'll stash him on the bench just to make sure that somebody else doesn't get him, because that 700 rushing yards in college is not being talked about enough. He has a rushing floor. He is athletic. His best comparable player on PlayerProfiler.com is Josh Allen. Very few have the size-adjusted speed at quarterback that Drake May has. He's a durable frame as well. So Drake May, ultimate sleeper cell this year. Absolutely going to start. Absolutely going to play games. I find it very realistic that Drake May starts as many games or more than Jacoby Brissett in year 1. Now we move to the running back room. Before we get to the wide receiver room, let's quickly talk about the running back room. Ramondre Stevenson, obviously still the 1A back. All right, we know this. And I think it's pretty clear that Antonio Gibson is the 1B. All right, no depth chart battle there, so to speak. We know the hierarchy, but what is this going to look like in fantasy football? As a Patriots fan, I feel like I have an obligation to give my opinion on this matter. So Ramondre Stevenson's opportunity share dipped slightly last season with Zeke on the roster. It went from 63% to 59%. His target share went down from 17% to 13%. And the weighted opportunities per game went from 15.6 to 14.5. So a slight decrease there overall. So Ramondre was given this asinine target share. There was no one else on the roster that was viable. They bring in Zeke, who is an effective pass catcher, still has this moderate juice left. and those metrics kind of fall back to normal. The team was pretty vocal for a couple of years that they didn't necessarily want Ramondre Stevenson to be this big bell cow back, but they had to give him the touches because there was no one else in the backfield. So they didn't want Ezekiel Elliott. What do? They go out and get Antonio Gibson. So the estimation of a 60% opportunity share with about 14 weighted opportunities per game, I think, is a fair expectation for the split with Gibson. Now, my biggest concern for Ramondre Stevenson is the improvement of the wide receiver core could cause Stevenson to fall closer to a 10% target share. Because as I'll get into in a minute, Antonio Gibson is a much better pass catcher than Ezekiel Elliott. So if Gibson steals some of those opportunities, a little bit more than Zeke, and the wide receiver core improving leads to fewer backfield targets, then Ramondre Stevenson could be looking closer to 13, 12.5 weighted opportunities per game. And that might seem small, a 1.5 bump, but recall that the 1.1 decrease in weighted opportunities per game dropped Ramondre Stevenson from top 10 in expected fantasy points per game to bordering on top 20 at 19. So another dip would cause Stevenson to fall closer to, RB25, RB27 in terms of expected fantasy points per game, which at an RB20 ADP is not an equation for success. So Stevenson scares me because Gibson kind of gets a fresh start here. We know that the Ron Rivera coaching staff kind of made up their mind about what they thought Antonio Gibson was. But looking at him as a pass catcher, first of all, in 2023, he was 6th in fantasy points per opportunity. He was, but only 22nd in yards per route run, which is his worst career season. 2022, he finished 9th. 2021, he finished 10th. And 2020, he finished 9th again in terms of yards per route run. And in true yards per carry as a rusher, he went from 18th in 2021 and then 47th, 64th, and back to 33rd in 2023. So yes, the Commanders' offensive line has not been something worth noting about, but his concerns as a rusher are there, which is why Stevenson is going to get the bulk of the touches. He's a much better rusher, but Gibson is an equally talented pass catcher. So that's my concern for Antonio Gibson. I see Gibson getting a closer opportunity share to what Zeke had last year with less carries. Zeke had a 12% target share and 12.5 weighted opportunities per game last year. Gibson, in his 2 of 4 seasons hitting 12 weighted opportunities per game, finished as the RB16 and the RB28 in fantasy points per game. And my projection is 10 weighted opportunities per game, finishing close to the RB38. He is right now drafted as the RB53. So I think just from what Zeke did last year, I don't think we need to get too attached to what Antonio Gibson did last year in Washington to project what his opportunity is going to be like here in New England. And even if he does, he finished as RB41 last year. That's still a 12-spot drop despite a situational value increase. So that's another ADP discrepancy that I love taking advantage of in fantasy drafts so far. But now, the piece de resistance of the New England Patriots offseason is figuring out what the hell is going to happen in this receiving core. And the short answer to all of this is that I am incredibly uninterested in any of these names in seasonal leagues. The pie is going to be widely distributed. We saw not only is the talent not there to where someone is going to command a alpha target share, we'll call it. The example of that is that Kendrick Bourne did it last year. And now there's more talent. So it's going to be hard for anybody out the gates to come out and command a 20% target share unless his name is Jalen Polk and he is truly that guy, hits the ground running day one. I expect a little bit of a ramp up for Polk. I don't think he's going to be the guy until later in the season. So given his ADP, I am willing to take shots on Jalen Polk at cost. They're all basically free anyway. So Polk is really the only one I'm interested in, as being a little demonstrative by saying that I wouldn't take anybody. But let's break down each of these guys. So I start with Kendrick Bourne. I've been throwing him some shade, talking about how on God's green earth he got a 20% target share last year, but he's performed well when asked in this Patriots offense. 12.5 fantasy points per game last season, 20% target share. He was number 2 in fantasy points per target in 2021 when he finished with nearly 11 fantasy points per game. So 2 out of the last 3 seasons, he's had double-digit plus fantasy points per game. Not bad for someone who's mostly a gadget receiver. The only problem is this is mostly just a factor of who's there. Even in 2021, the receiving core was very, very thin. All right. And horrible efficiency from Bourne in terms of his receiving metrics, yards per route run. He doesn't command targets at a very respectable rate either. So I don't need to convince you guys that Kendrick Bourne isn't a true wide receiver 1. But right now, he is the wide receiver 1 on this depth chart. And I think he keeps that going into day 1. He's done enough so far within the organization to where he's earned that. And so right now, Kendrick Bourne is the top dog and somebody who could be getting 5 targets a game to start the season because of familiarity with the offense and all these things. He's familiar with the culture. And Demario Douglas is going to be right behind him in terms of target leaders. Again, mostly just because of that familiarity, but because Demario Douglas is also talented. So Pop Douglas was the team's target leader with 79 and the receiving yards leader with 561. So right now, per our lads, he is listed as the team's starting slot receiver. And Kendrick Bourne is listed as a starter as well. This is locked in as of right now. While I don't know if Kendrick Bourne can hold his starting job, I do think Demario Douglas can hold his. He finished in the 40s in terms of his receiving efficiency, so fairly productive for his rookie season, especially with no surrounding talent, poor target quality. He was number 56 among wide receivers in catchable target rate last year. So not, low quality targets, low catch rate. Obviously on a route run basis, if you're not catching a high percent of your passes, your efficiency on a per route basis is going to look even worse. So that kind of hinders the efficiency there. And so Pop Douglas, with what he was able to do, if we look at the game log real quick, something I forgot to kind of write down, but we need to examine, because when Demario Douglas was being utilized heavy in this offense, we got a wide receiver 27 week, we got a wide receiver 23 week, and then he got the concussion and kind of stuttered then on from the rest of the season, struggled to kind of come back in stride, didn't really get a high percent of the snaps again until week 17, 18. So he was hitting his stride, and then he had that concussion, missed 2 games, was kind of slow to come back, but drew 6, 7, 9, and 8 targets, 9 targets, 7 targets, and during this stretch. So 6, 7, 7, 9, 9, 5, 8, 5, 5 to end the season is respectable. So if he's getting 6.5 targets, let's say 6.25 across a 16 game season, he's going to clear 100 targets this year. That's notable if Demario Douglas is going to be hitting 100 targets in an offense that we expect to massively improve just because of the competency at the very minimum. Now, for somebody who doesn't quite fit into this picture yet, as we'll get into the rookies here in a minute, is KJ Osborne. I need to go through this a lot quicker. We are 20 minutes into the show, and I've still only talked about the Patriots. KJ Osborne was productive in spurts for Minnesota, but horribly efficient. Finished outside of the top 70 yards per route run and targets per route run in every season in Minnesota. And he's just not a starting caliber receiver in the NFL. So I know there's talk about KJ Osborne being a starter. I think there's too much talent in this receiving core for him to start. And that's not necessarily an over-evaluation of the current talent. It's a proper evaluation of KJ Osborne's talent. He's a spot guy. He's all right, but he's not talented enough to fully unseat one of these guys, especially right away when he has just as much catching up to do as everybody else in terms of the offense. Now, currently listed as a starter, and I'm telling you to buy this 100% on our lads, Jalen Polk is listed as the team's third starting receiver. Now, Jalen Polk, as a senior at Washington at nearly 1,200 receiving yards on a 19% target share, playing alongside top 10 pick Rome Odunze and third-round pick Jalen McMillan. He's getting praised for his ability to pick up the playbook quickly. He's got great film. The film analysts out there that I trust, Matt Harmon, Jetpack Galileo, Ray Garvin, for three of them, are all praising him for his ability to work the route tree, create separation, yak with the ball in his hand. Everything he does is just so smooth and talented. He has all the tools. And so the starting gig may not be his day one as of right now. The beat is saying it is. There is a small section of Twitter that is promoting KJ Osborne for this position, but I think it goes to Polk by the time day one is there. I think we're going to see him and Drake May make some pretty special plays in the preseason, and it's going to be very clear that Polk has the most talent. He's the most pro-ready among the rest of the candidates in this receiver core, and he's going to take those snaps away from KJ Osborne, which leaves Javon Baker fighting KJ Osborne for that wide receiver 4 position. So Javon Baker is a big play maestro. He excels in contested catch situations. He has work to do on his route tree, but Matt Harmon graded him very well. Actually, in fact, he graded higher on his route tree than Jalen Polk per reception perception. So film analysts like Matt Harmon are saying that he is ready to take that next step. He does have some things to work on. He had some concentration drops in college. We know Xavier Worthy was getting bogged down with similar concerns. But 97th percentile college target share, just absolutely dominated the opportunity at UCF. So it'll take some time for him to get significant chances, but he's coming for Kendrick Bourne. So Kendrick Bourne has to look out. He is a historic gadget player. Javon Baker could be a complete tool set, and it's not going to be long before Javon Baker leaps over KJ Osborne, and it could be by the end of the season when Javon Baker even leaps over Kendrick Bourne as well. So be on the lookout for Javon Baker. Takeaway 1. Takeaway 2, Pop Douglas, starting receiver, could lead the group in targets again. And 3 is Jalen Polk is the dark horse. Maybe takes a ramp up, but probably the highest upside candidate just because of the fact that he'll be getting the downfield targets. Demario Douglas will be relied to create yak. And so Polk has the highest upside, although it may take, until week 8 for him to start hitting his stride. All right. We surely took our time talking about the Patriots, but we will quickly go through the Bills, Dolphins, and Jets right after this.
Hey, why do we partner with the FFPC? Because they have the widest variety of fantasy football formats, and it's the easiest place to find all types of fantasy football contests in the world. What if you want to play for high stakes? Well, they have a $6 million prize pool with their Fantasy Players Championship. They also have way too early best ball leagues that start in February and dynasty leagues. They have the closest thing to a liquid market for orphans that there is in all of Dynasty. And the FFPC has sponsored us for half a decade because we are actually delivering information that can help fantasy gamers, and they're generating so much interest and bringing in so many new users, casual users even. The FFPC creates a unique experience where you can both compete against the best and make money. Use promo code UNDERWORLD to get $25 off your first team. $25 off your first team at the FFPC with promo code UNDERWORLD. Go get it!
Go get it, FFPC, Roto Underworld, promo code UNDERWORLD. We are back with Player Profiler today, and we're going to talk about the Bills. So, RB2 battle in Buffalo. technically New York, so I'm not wrong there. But the RB2 currently listed as Ty Johnson, but right behind him is 4th-round pick Ray Davis. So with many still believing that James Cook cannot handle a bulk share of the touches, who truly is the RB2? Is it Ty Johnson? Because that would surprise the hell out of me. Now, Ty Johnson, let's look at PlayerProfiler.com and just see how quickly we can poke the hole in the Ty Johnson argument. All right, 3 and 2 fantasy points per game in his last 2 seasons. Not great. Career high of 7.3 fantasy points per game. All right, not great. 5 years in the league, so he's made it quite a long time without ever breaking through. No more than 61 rushing attempts in a season. Hasn't had more than 30 rushing attempts or more than 12 receptions in the past 2 seasons. All right, well, what about his efficiency? I don't necessarily care about it because it's on too small of a sample. So we're going to go to 2021 when he at least had nearly 100 touches, ranked 51st in true yards per carry, but 7th in yards per route run. Now, when you continue to scroll through Player Profiler stats, you'll see that Ty Johnson on multiple occasions has shown the ability to produce efficiently as a receiver. He's also shown plenty of times that he does not have that in his bag. So what does that tell me as somebody who floats between 24, 16, 34, 12, and 7 receptions? You're not running a lot of routes, and we could see that on playerprofiler.com, a 10% route percentage last year, a 38% route percentage in 2021, which was 33rd. But again, that's the best he's got in his entire career. So coaches for 5 years have viewed him as a minimal touch candidate. Then they went out and drafted Ray Davis, electric playmaker out of Kentucky. All right, so just keep in mind everything we just said about Ty Johnson. Now let's talk about Ray Davis. 70th percentile speed score. We'll quick flashback to Ty Johnson, who has an 86th percentile speed score. So straight line speed, edge Ty Johnson. 52nd percentile burst score, edge Ty Johnson. But look what he did in college, 94th percentile college dominator rating. That's the percentage of his total team yards and total team touchdowns. 64th percentile college yards per carry, so upper percentile efficiency, and an 82nd percentile college target share. Anyone who watched Ray Davis knows the type of plays he can make with the ball in his hands. He has 2 straight 1,000-yard seasons, 2 straight 29 reception seasons at Kentucky and Vanderbilt, respectively. So they take this electric playmaker who has 88th percentile BMI, advantage Ray Davis, better candidate for goal line touches, better candidate for targets, yet is listed as the team's RB3. This is simply because he's a rookie. Unless Ray Davis goes out there and has just fumble after fumble in the preseason, believe me, he's going to be this team's RB2. But the answer to who is the RB2 is James Cook. This is still going to be the James Cook show in Buffalo. So in the depth chart, it should say RB1, James Cook, RB2. Oh, that's also James Cook. So he was top 10 in weighted opportunities per game last year. And that was before Joe Brady started increasing his usage. So that game against the Jets, he ended up RB10 and then kept going with RB12, RB3, RB2 for that 4-game stretch where he went just scorched earth. And then he wasn't targeted at all in the passing game for some reason. RB48. Opportunities started wavering as the team struggled to find their identity, but then put up 80-yard performances in back-to-back weeks in the playoffs against Pittsburgh and Kansas City. It's one of the few things in that offense that worked last year. 12th in true yards per carry, 6th in yards per route run. He's a great back, and he's more qualified than either of those two to handle the bulk touch of the opportunities. I'd be shocked if Cook couldn't repeat a 62% opportunity share again this year. So don't get crazy thinking about who the RB2 is. It doesn't matter who the RB2 is. Like The Rock, because the RB1 is James Cook, and he's going to be a bell cow in this offense. 62% is essentially a new bell cow by my definition, but he's going to be the touch leader by far in Buffalo. Now, what do we do with the wide receiver room? So Dalton Kincaid, top dog in the offense. Think Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews when there was little surrounding talent in those offenses. A 27 to 30% target share with a 30% red zone target share is totally realistic. I know that Josh Larkey got clowned a little bit for saying that he would take Kincaid over Andrews in drafts this year. Well, so would I. So I'm very high on Kincaid. Curtis Samuel, who should be valued as this team's wide receiver 1, is not currently being valued as this team's wide receiver 1. On the depth chart, he's listed as a starter. On fantasy draft ADP is listed as the wide receiver 2. But we're probably looking at a season like a 2020 situation where he sees a near 20% target share, 18, 19% with low target depth, relying on his yak ability. And this season, by the way, he only scored 3 touchdowns and ended as the wide receiver 27. So it's pretty easy, especially if we paint the scenario where Keon Coleman is slow to come on, a little bit underwhelming of a rookie. We could see this path, especially given his production profile. It's easy to see Curtis Samuel getting to an 18, 19% target share. And if they use him correctly, it's easy to see him being a top 30 option, making Curtis Samuel a huge value in fantasy drafts right now. And then who should be the wide receiver 2, potentially the wide receiver 3 in this core, but is listed as a starter, is Keon Coleman. Now, I don't think his starting role is necessarily in jeopardy, although I wouldn't be shocked if Mac Hollins, Chase Claypool. Yeah, I would be shocked if Mac Hollins, but I would not be shocked if Chase Claypool ended up being this team's starter. He has a history of production. Keon Coleman does not. Similar talents, except guess what? Chase Claypool is fast, at least. He has size-adjusted speed. So it wouldn't shock me at all if Chase Claypool actually started day 1 for this team, just absolutely torching any Keon Coleman drafted teams. Because when we look at Keon Coleman, there's not a lot impressive. He's got a lot to prove in this league. He's struggled to produce outside of contested catch situations in college. He very rarely created separation in college. He has a limited route tree, and by God, is he slow. He's more than likely going to be used as a primary decoy if he's in. And if that's the case, because Khalil Shakir is certainly not going to be the deep threat decoy, we've seen it in his past profile. They've never used him that way. It would make sense for Chase Claypool to be that guy to take the top off the defense, keep them honest. So Keon Coleman's alleged starting spot, I believe, is in jeopardy. We've seen a lot of coach speak saying that Keon Coleman has catch up to do. So Keon Coleman could be the outside man looking in here, because the starting slot receiver who is listed here, and what we can probably confirm based on the team's actions going out and getting Claypool and Keon Coleman this offseason only, that Khalil Shakir is the team's starting slot receiver. Now, I like Khalil Shakir. He has good per route efficiency. He has a solid college profile coming out of Boise State, but I don't know what type of opportunity is going to be there for him. So James Cook, I just cleared out that tab that I meant to come back to, but James Cook last season, 10% target share. So let's copy and paste that. Let's be conservative and say 25% target share for Kincaid. We're at 35%, 18% for Samuel, 45, 53%. We're already drawing close. Claypool probably get an 8% at the very least, 61. And then Keon Coleman with a 14% target share. We see that the gap of what Khalil Shakir can do starts getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller as you add up these pieces of pie. So where's the upside for Khalil Shakir? Well, it has to be that Chase Claypool is awful and Keon Coleman is just as bad. And he's better than Curtis Samuel. Because as we've known from the Bills, this offense, while good, is not generally capable of sustaining multiple receivers in one week. So I'm very bearish on Khalil Shakir just because of the opportunity that's going to be there. I do think he's going to be the team's starting slot receiver coming off the field in 3 receiver sets, which is why this wide receiver battle between Chase Claypool and Keon Coleman is very important. Because if Claypool wins this battle, as much as I hate to say it, he's one of the biggest values in fantasy because Keon Coleman is one of the most overdrafted assets in fantasy. A little yin-yang there, how that would work. So now we will close the show by quickly talking about the Jets and the Dolphins. Now, looking at the Jets depth chart, we got Mike Williams, we got Garrett Wilson locked in, right? And Allen Lazard is not going to be a starting slot receiver. He never has been. No one really cares about who the RB2 is, and quite frankly, no one really knows. Isaiah Davis and Braylon Allen appear to be battling it out. Both of them are handcuff options. I prefer Isaiah Davis because of his pass catching ability. I would prefer him to be the number 2. But if Brees goes down, it's going to be an ugly committee. So I'm not interested in really hashing out the RB2 situation there yet. I mentioned it for the Bills because I do think Ray Davis does have contingent upside where he is probably leading the team in touches and he's a pass catching threat. We don't really know what Isaiah Davis or Braylon Allen can do, but we do know that Ray Davis plugged into this Bills offense as the running back 1 could get 5 targets in a game. So I think the battle's just a little bit uglier in New York. But what we do have to talk about is the slot receiver battle, because currently Xavier Gibson is listed as the starter over 3rd-round pick Malachi Corley. So we can start with Corley, the yak god out of Western Kentucky. I mean, this kid is hard to tackle. He's mostly a catch and run guy, a producer after the catch. But that's something that this team needs. It's a Randall Cobb-esque role that Aaron Rodgers loves to pummel with targets. So it's an important role on the Jets to have. Now, Corley, coming out of Western Kentucky, does have production concerns. 60th percentile dominator rating, 68th percentile target share, and 50th percentile breakout age without any impressive workout metrics coming out of a small school. So not the most impressive athletic profile, not the most impressive production profile at a small school, but the film, he certainly looks good on film. And his competition is Xavier Gibson, who didn't really do much outside of his week 1 punt return touchdown. His, efficiency metrics were awful. First of all, on a targets per route run basis, he was 96th among wide receivers. He was 98th among wide receivers in yards per route run. This is not a receiver. I'm sorry to say. He is a special teams asset, and he's a good one. But he's not a slot receiver. Malachi Corley is a slot receiver. So the answer to who is the team's wide receiver 3, who is the team's slot receiver, despite the noise with Xavier Gibson, the ADP is correct here. It is Malachi Corley. But the real answer, just like James Cook, the real answer to who is the team's wide receiver 3, it's Garrett Wilson. Because Garrett Wilson doesn't have anybody really to compete with besides Mike Williams. So he's going to get a 30% target share. So just like the winner of the RB2 battle in Buffalo and New York is James Cook and Breece Hall, respectively, the winner of the wide receiver 3 battle in New York is Garrett Wilson. And then similarly, wide receiver 3 battle in Miami, except this one's a little bit more interesting. We have a 3-headed race between Odell Beckham Jr., Malik Washington, and tight end Jonnu Smith to be this team's 3rd option. Now, spoiler alert, yes, the winner of this race is, in fact, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I've caught on to the theme of the show. But Odell Beckham Jr. actually performed pretty well last year, despite having an upper percentile target depth where these targets are tougher to convert. He finished 25th in yards per route run and had a couple of spike weeks. Granted, some of them were fueled by his 3 touchdowns, but he had a 4-week stretch where he cleared 11 fantasy points per game in 5-game stretch where he cleared 11 fantasy points per game in 4 out of the 5 weeks. And then with it's either the outbreak of Zay Jones or the return of Mark Andrews that Odell started to falter again. I believe this is when Zay Flowers started to break out a little bit, because week 14, he's wide receiver 9, and then he doesn't see 50% of the snaps again. No injuries reported. Never scored above 5 fantasy points for the rest of the regular season. So he ghosted out on the Ravens after having a really good stretch. So Odell had somewhat of a career reviving year in terms of efficiency metrics and being able to say on paper that he can still produce efficiently, but not necessarily a good season. He is going to be 32 years old with one leg, playing on his 3rd team in as many seasons. So it's going to be tough for Odell to truly win that spot. He is listed as the team's, slot receiver, that 3rd starter. But the thing is with Miami, Mike McDaniel is a creative guy. It would shock me until they truly find somebody who's good enough to be that 3 all year long. It'll shock me that we have one 3rd receiver. There's going to be a lot of Odell, a lot of Jonnu Smith, a lot of Malik Washington, but at some point, somebody's going to break the mold and be the 3rd option in this offense. And Jonnu Smith, since he's now the first tight end that McDonald has actually wanted to bring into the building with pass catching ability and blocking ability, it's the big detractor to Mike Gesicki that he can't block. Jonnu Smith can do both. Jonnu Smith 12th in yards per route run last year with 1.58. That would rank moderately amongst receivers. He had a 14% target share in Atlanta, was targeted on nearly 20% of his routes, and had 5.2 yards after the catch per target, racking up yak at an enormous rate. And we all know what Mike McDaniel thinks about people who can earn yak. He likes to use them. He had 21 fantasy points as a season high. He cleared 10 fantasy points 4 times last season, 5 times last season, including week 18. And even though he's 29 years old, maybe aging a little bit, still has upper percentile athleticism. And he's my favorite target in drafts later on in the season, because I think he ends up being, outside of running backs, the team's 3rd most targeted receiver. Odell Beckham is injury prone. He's old. He's not as effective as he once was. He doesn't threaten defenses like he used to. It's going to be a lot easier for Mike McDaniel to scheme Jonnu Smith around the field because of his versatility as being a tight end. It's going to create more mismatches, and it's going to mean Jonnu Smith being a relevant fantasy asset on a weekly basis. And it means more that he's the wide receiver 3 because he's a tight end. That bar for fantasy points is lower, making him more relevant. Now he's going to have to fight off Malik Washington, because he's going to be climbing his way throughout the depth chart. In fact, I won't be surprised when he's this team starting slot receiver midway through the season on the depth chart. 94th percentile college dominator rating out of Virginia, 98th percentile target share, 45th percentile breakout age. He has a 96th percentile burst score, which is the most predictive metric for wide receiver success for prospects. Best comparable player is Zay Flowers, and he was this entire Virginia offense, over 1,400 receiving yards on 110 receptions last season with 9 receiving touchdowns. He struggled to get things going at Northwestern. Don't blame him. Transferred to Virginia and was absolutely electric. Somehow was only a 6th-round pick. I think that was a mistake. But he's going to be climbing up the depth chart, so don't be surprised. In my mind, he's already the team's starting slot receiver. Odell is there purely because it's the offseason. We don't have a lot of information. I think by week 4, Malik Washington has a higher snap percentage than Odell Beckham. I'm going to put that out there. And that is going to do it for the show today. We spent about half the time talking about the Patriots, but they do have the most muddled roster. So let me know in the comments what you think about some of these depth chart battles. Is there someone who I didn't talk about that you think is going to steam up depth charts in the AFC East? We're going to see how this show does. So let me know what you think in the comments, whether you like it, don't like it. Give the video a like, give the channel a subscribe if you liked the content. If the consensus is a positive reaction, we'll continue this series by going through other divisions as we round out the summer on my Saturday portion of Player Profiler today. If the consensus is negative, I'll go back to the drawing board and we'll, if there's no immediate news to talk about, we'll figure out some different creative things to talk about. So that's going to be the show for me, Matt Babich, your host of Player Profiler today on Saturdays. Like and subscribe. If you're on Twitter, head over to YouTube, Player Profiler News. Give us a thumbs up. Give us a subscribe. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next Saturday. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.